Hi, Austin again here. Glad to have you in this freelance business blueprint. This is our last lesson. I'm going to review what we've gone over so far, and then we're going to talk through several best practices. So, if you look in the upper left hand side, skills, interests, that's what we covered at the very beginning. How do those overlap? Maybe that's where you should point your freelance services. Build three offerings around those services, find a couple of potential niches or market verticals where you can start to do some experiments, and then make sure you develop an ideal customer profile for each niche or each distinct audience. Flip the pain points and the other things that you see right there. Goals, pains, problems, needs, wants, objections. Flip that into really good messaging. And I've given you the framework right there to the right so that you can create your value proposition and your messaging. And then from there, we talked about 12 ways to reach people. And I encouraged you to make a very simple marketing plan and to put in at least 50 to 100 activities for each niche using each strategy. And then let's see, the very last thing that we did was set your rates. What are you going to charge? And I encouraged you to start with what you feel good about making. Where does that leave us? Well, with best practices. If there's one thing I could leave you with, one thought, it's that business is not this fortress that you have to lay siege to, where there are all these successful people on the inside and you're on the outside and you have to like lay a ladder against the fortress and try to scale the wall. If you go out and make $1, you are in business. The rest is just getting a little bit smarter with each experiment, with each experience, with all of the feedback you get from clients, right? And so that actually brings me to best practice number one. And this one relates to marketing. A lot of people just give up too soon. Let's say you want to focus on Instagram or you want to focus on email marketing. Maybe you put up 20 Instagram posts. Maybe you send out 4 emails to a list of friends, family, and former colleagues, and you come up empty handed. Those 20 Instagram posts don't produce any project leads. The 4 emails don't produce any project leads, and you say, well, that must not work. And then you sort of pull out your hair and like, what else can I do next? Well, I would just say, and we went over this in the marketing lesson, make sure you don't give up too soon. It's really important to time box your experiments and say, well, maybe I'll do 6 months. What would 100 posts over 6 months look like? What would, I don't know, 20 or 30 emails instead of 4 over 6 months look like? Now, number 2, don't keep your freelance business a secret. I know this seems obvious, but you have to tell everybody what you're doing. You have to tell everybody that you're available for hire. Give people a chance to care. People can't care if they don't know. This next piece of advice goes back to something I said earlier, which is this experimental approach. Pay attention to what wants to happen. Have a friend who has 2 niches. One is in pharmaceuticals, another one is law firms. And she just found that getting the work from law firms was a lot easier. Now, she never intended to focus on law firms. It just so happened she had a friend who needed some writing help. But one thing led to another, and pretty soon she's doing work for like 2 or 3 or 4 lawyers. And I just think that's interesting because this niche that she thought would be a really good fit ended up being an uphill climb. And this other niche that she didn't necessarily think about ended up taking on a life of its own. One thing led to another. So pay attention to what wants to happen is one specific service that you sell easier to sell than others? Is one deliverable in a specific project type easier to sell than everything else? And could you scale that up? Could you sell 100 of those instead of just one? You get what I'm saying. All right, the next is, how do you handle payments? Well, I pretty much demand, I'll say require. Require is a nicer word. I require a deposit before I start working, and I have found that if you require a deposit before you start working, that helps everybody stay honest. You can't get burned by clients not paying you. They may take a long time with the other payments that come in the future, but there's something that feels really good about having money in the bank before you get started, and it just has helped me navigate so many weird situations where the client wants to get started right away. And then I say, well, I require a deposit. And they're like, well, we've never been asked to pay a deposit before. And I say, well, that's my policy. Maybe we'll have a chance to work together in the future. And then when I start walking away, they're like, oh, okay, we'll pay a deposit. And I'm like, oh, okay, very interesting. And then I found that asking clients to meet me halfway from the get-go um, ends up getting me more respect throughout the project. I don't ever want to be difficult to work with, but I have found that some companies think of freelancers as small and they treat them accordingly. And I try to keep protocols and policies and practices in place. That was a lot of P's. Um, to establish myself as a person who will either be treated with respect or I will leave. So I found that my pricing schedule, 50% up front, 25% after 30 days, 25% after 60 days, just works. At the very least, require a deposit. I don't need to beat a dead horse. Do not offer discounts. If the client wants to pay less, then the scope needs to shrink accordingly. You should not give a client the same amount of work for a lower price simply because the client asked. You're not running a charity, and you're not in the couponing game. All right, I think I'm just going to let you read the rest of these on your own. They're all kind of in the same vein, just best practices. Follow this, try not to overthink it. You're going to do fine. The most important thing is to keep learning. Keep learning, pay attention to what wants to happen, and get a little bit smarter every day. Just a little bit smarter. So, thank you for the time you've put into these lessons so far, and be sure and reach out and let me know how everything is going. See ya!